Today I wanted to do a book review on something that I recently finished reading, Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. I'm a big fan of Stephen King. I've read maybe 6 of his books, so this was something that I actually asked for Christmas and I just got around to reading. This is the sequel to The Shining, which is a book that I read a couple of years ago, so I don't remember it as well, but there are references made in here that are very clear. So basically, Dr. Sleep follows Dan Torrance, who is the little kid from The Shining, in his adult years. And it begins with his struggles with alcoholism, as well as just his own problems in his life. And he eventually settles in a town in New Hampshire. The book then follows Dan and his mysterious connection to a 12-year-old girl named Amber Stone, who also possesses The Shining. The main driving force are the antagonists, who are the True Knot, who are introduced in this book. They're basically evil encapsulated and completely new to Dr. Sleep. They weren't at all in The Shining, which throughout the book was a little difficult to believe, considering how strong Dan's Shining was when he was a kid. But, you know, you go with it because it's a book. Overall, I actually liked the book. I thought it was pretty good, although it didn't feel much like a Stephen King book. I read a lot of Stephen King because I think that his strong point is in his descriptions of a lot of the horror elements in his books, and this book just didn't really have a lot of that. I thought that the plot was fairly solid, and it was a good read. I liked the story. There just weren't all of those scenes where, like, in It with the refrigerator scene, or Misery with the scene where she, with his foot. And there also just wasn't a lot of suspense. The book ends the way that you would expect it to. Admittedly, it gets there in a pretty interesting way, but while there was a lot of tension, I was never really overly concerned for any of the protagonists. Things went wrong for them, but a lot of things also went right for them. I don't know. I feel like that's a weird thing to criticize. But there were times in King's other books where I physically had to set the book down because I was getting so stressed out. That didn't happen with this book, although it did absorb me. Quite the opposite, actually. I didn't want to put the book down because I found it interesting. The twists at the end, I think, were really well written, but a few of them I understood but didn't quite care about. It was like he threw that in there for a shock moment, and I wasn't the biggest fan. It was cool, but that was it. I didn't feel like it added too much to the story. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to talk about what they were, but it was alright, I guess. Something that I didn't quite like was that the Abra Stone, one of the protagonists, and one of the main antagonist, Rose the Hat, they followed they had the Betty and Veronica complex going on, and by that I mean Abra was like blonde with blue eyes, and Rose the Hat had black hair and slightly ethnic features, and these were things that were mentioned a lot, and I wasn't feeling that. Part of it is because I have black hair, so it's definitely a personal thing, but it's also just a thing that I feel like I see a lot, and I don't like it, but I guess it was a small part in the book that just kind of annoyed me. That was just something that really stuck out to me. One good thing about the book, usually I do not like the way Stephen King ends his books. A lot of them just don't have good endings, in my opinion. But I think that this ending was pretty good. I won't spoil anything, but it was solid. I think his biggest problem with his endings is that he jumps forward in the epilogue to show where they are now, which is okay, but then by doing that he also brings up new ideas, which is something that I don't think should be done in a book. To me, a lot of media should be self-contained in itself, so that there's like a solid beginning and a solid end, and by introducing new ideas you kind of lose that. But still, I don't really have any complaints for the ending to this book. I think the connections that he makes to The Shining, I feel like a lot of them are forced, or at least unnecessary. Like, it adds a little bit of extra substance to it, I guess, but if you remove that, I don't think the story loses anything. Like the connection that it has to the Overlook Hotel, I don't think that really matters much. In the beginning, Danny is haunted by ghosts from the Overlook, and that's something that makes sense because it ties into it. And throughout the book, he's also haunted. But, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of the connections that he tries to make separate from Danny, but to The Shining, the book, I feel like a lot of them are just for purposes of tying them together, because really, The Shining and Doctor Sleep are two completely separate books. They could be, but with one shared character. It has been a few years since I've read The Shining, but I recall it being more scary than Doctor Sleep. That also might have been because I was younger. So The Shining was scary because a lot of supernatural stuff was happening, and there were a lot of descriptions of them and of just gory things and awful things that were happening. In Doctor Sleep, the horror, I think, stems from the tension and the fact that it's less isolated than The Shining. Since The Shining takes place in a closed-off hotel in the middle of winter, whereas Doctor Sleep is about the kids who get abducted and never found across the country. Hypothetically, I guess Doctor Sleep should be scarier, but to me, it just wasn't really. Maybe because I'm not a kid and I don't have kids, or I don't know, is it just a lack of empathy on my part? I'm not sure. Overall, I think that it was a really enjoyable read, and I would probably recommend it to anyone who likes horror, but isn't so much into the gory stuff. Even if you don't like horror, I think the plot is interesting enough to hold over on its own. Also, I'd just like to talk about the book cover. I really like the design of it. I think it's funny when, like, the author's name is just as recognizable or is a greater selling point than the story, where their name takes up a bigger part than the title. But I like the way this is done because it's integrated into the picture. The back, I also like the way it looks, although Redrum was not brought up in this. This is, of course, the book jacket. The actual book itself, I think, is really pretty, too. I might be biased, though, because red, black, and white is my favorite color scheme. That also might be why I like his books, because most of his books have the red, black, white color scheme. It's very reminiscent of just horror, I think. I want to do another review. I think the next one I'm going to do is on Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. So potentially I could have that up next week or not, but I'll try to get it done. That's about it for today. So bye.